Welcome to the Robcast. This is a show about Oakville, the people that live, work, and do business here. Our guest today is one of Canada's most prolific movie producers and television directors. He has had over 22 awards, including 2 Emmys and 10 nominations. We are honored today to have Paul Saltzman. You're not going to want to miss this.
It's the Robcast Podcast. He's with you for the next hour or 20 minutes. Who knows? Let's see how it goes.
The Robcast is brought to you by Oakville's own Fisher Private Wealth Management of RBC Dominion Securities and Angus Fraser Private Banker with RBC Private Banking Oakville.
Here he is. It's Rob Raham.
Paul, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
Well, I wanted to preface this episode, and I don't usually do this, but we have a mutual friend in Augie Carnevale, and he reached out to me a week ago, said he's putting out an article about you, and he also kind of mentioned that his support for the Robcast and that what we're doing is important. He said, "Would you like to have him as a guest?" And admittedly, I did not know who Paul Saltzman was.
Which is probably good.
So he sent over the article that he wrote that's out, been publicized and out in Oakville, and I read the first 2 paragraphs, and I emailed him immediately, said we'd be honored to have Paul on the show. And the last week I've spent watching your movies, reading your journey, and I have to tell you, it's changed my life in just a week. So I'm very excited to have you here today for you to share your story with our viewers out here.
That's really kind of you, and I'm almost embarrassed, but not.
I'm going to go back. Let's start with 1964. You're a student studying mathematics and sciences. You're in engineering, and something changes. Your direction changes. Can you walk us through what that change was and how it happened?
Oh, okay. Well, that's fascinating you're asking this. I didn't tell my brother for 10 years that I was thrown out of university. I was so ashamed. But since you're going back there, there's something very interesting to say. When I grew up, people didn't know about things like kinetic learners. All kids are the same. You put your nose into the book, study hard. If you're not doing well, it's because you're failing. Nobody understood, as they do today, that kids learn through different senses. Some people learn more through hearing. Some people learn more through visual.
Yes.
I'm what's called, I learned 5 years ago, a kinetic learner.
Okay.
So I always hated school, but I didn't know it. And I didn't know it because I couldn't, you're failing, study harder. You're failing, study harder. It was like trying to learn German speaking French.
Okay.
It's like a different world. So I went through engineering. I went through... I failed twice. I felt horrible. The best thing I ever did in university was I was a U of T cheerleader. I got to throw young women around me and toss them up, and we'd do pyramids, and we'd cheer for the football team.
My mom was a U of T cheerleader around that time. I wonder if there's a connection. Anyway, so it's a different story. So,
what is her name?
Jane Harris Raham. She was Jane Harris when she was at school. Yeah, she might have been. Hopefully, I'm not dating her.
What years was she in university?
I think now I'm going to get in trouble. I think it was late '60s, but I don't want to go down. I'm sorry, Mom.
All right.
Yeah, it was recently. So sorry.
Yeah.
Moving on. You're a cheerleader in U of T.
So I basically got disbarred, and there's a story behind that we don't need to go into because we don't probably have enough time. So. I felt horrible, and I felt ashamed. 5 years ago, U of T collects my archives, and there's a party, a reception in the rare book room at the Robarts Graduate Library at St. George and Hoskins, which happens to be the area I grew up in. And I say to the fellow who's the head of Media Commons, they say, "I'd like to tell this story." And he says, "Sure, do it." So there's 100 people, and people are laughing because I'm a storyteller. Mm-hmm. And the end of it was, I got disbarred from U of T, and this is just such an honor to be welcomed back. So they've got all my films and Beatles photographs and all that kind of stuff. So it's a sweet honor.
Right.
So what changed was that when I got thrown out of university, I had a very odd experience. I come out of Simcoe. I remember the moment like today, because you're ashamed, and so I appealed to the board of the U of T, the highest place you can go, which was Capit, whatever that board was called. You can't throw me out. You can't throw me out. I need a degree to support a family, which is what my parents, who went through the Depression, said. You need a degree to support a family. You need a degree to support a family. Became a tape recording. So we do this to young people. I think I'm saying this because we need to recognize in children what is their interest in. What nobody ever said, so what are you interested?
Yeah.
And nobody ever said, we notice you're good at puzzles. I love puzzles. I'm really good at puzzles. Boom, right? So I come out of Simcoe Hall. I've picked up the letter. I'm tearing open the letter, which is the result of my begging them not to throw me out because I need a degree to support a family. I never have gotten a degree. I've never had trouble supporting a family. Who knew, right? So they said, okay, this is my summary. Okay, we won't disbar you for life. We'll disbar you for 1 year. You can apply after a year. And I screamed, yes! Because in that instant, I was set free. We have fascinating
from what
psyches.
you thought was where you needed to be, right?
Yeah. The psyche of every human. We got 8 billion psyches, and every one is unique. And they're all very complex. It's why how are we going to get peace in the Middle East? I don't know,
Yeah.
So I went south to Mississippi, and I volunteered with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as a civil rights worker to do voter registration in communities, because blacks were being refused to vote, and finally they were given the vote, but in fact many obstacles were put in the way. Like at one point in the early 60s, if you registered to vote, you might be killed for it. Your house would maybe be
Just for
burnt
registering.
down, just for registering to vote. The bank, if they had a mortgage, the white bank manager, who was probably a member of the White Citizens Council, we called the White Citizens Council the White Collar Clan, Ku Klux Klan, White Collar Klan. You'd have your mortgage pulled. So there were many reasons black people didn't register to vote, even if they wanted to. So I went south to help in that. And the reason was I was brought up to, my parents were atheists. They said there's no God, there's no soul, there's no spirit. I actually have experienced those, so I actually do know something about God and soul and spirit. That's another interesting conversation.
We'll get there.
Okay. So what they did teach me, which was brilliant, the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. I remember my father saying to me once, and he wasn't a great father. He was a famous television star. He was a pretty poor father. But he gave me some enormous gifts besides half of my life. My mother gave me the other half of my life. He said, if you see a drunk in the gutter, before you step over and keep walking, ask yourself what you would want if you were the drunk. How brilliant is that? And I must have been an early teenager.
Putting yourself in the other person's shoes, right?
Exactly. Nelson Mandela, before you try and understand, walk a mile in their shoes, which is all about empathy and compassion, right? So that was a huge change. I was jailed. I was punched in the head by a Ku Klux Klan member. I took him to court. My lawyer said, what they actually said is, are you out of your effing mind? The FBI came to interview me because they hit the press, and the FBI were two wet behind the ears young men, probably in their late 20s or early 30s, and they said, do you know who you're dealing with? So the young man who punched me in the head was a member of the Klan. His father was Klan royalty.
Betchy?
His father, Dula Beckwith.
Beckwith.
His father is the man who assassinated Medgar Evers, shot him in the back. Medgar Evers was the head of the NAACP for Mississippi. It's a famous story. His father got away with it for 30 years because the white juries kept clearing him.
Yeah.
Until...
What was it inside you that's like, you're in this, were you aware of how dangerous the position you were in? Was it just something inside of you that said, I got to keep...
This is very interesting. I bet you'll relate to this. When you're 21, you're invincible. You can't, in a way, you can't imagine your own end, in a way. So I wasn't afraid. But 42 years later, I go back for the first time, and I'm just wanting to see how things have changed. I'm not thinking of making a film at all. I'm just saying, I wonder what Mississippi's like. So I went back for a week. I pull out of the Hilton Hotel at the edge of Jackson. I start driving up the I-55 highway because I was stationed in Greenwood.
Okay.
And Greenwood was a very tough town, very racist town. It's where the de la Beckwiths lived, right? And I get on the highway, and all of a sudden, I'm in terror. And I'm driving along, I'm thinking, what is going on? I'm in fear, like terror. And it figured it out over about a half an hour of just calming down. I buried the fear of 1965. You know, I was 21. You're not going to get killed, but clearly there was a lot of danger. I'd been assaulted. My partner and I, we always worked in twos. They didn't want white people to be the B'wana saving the black people. So in the civil rights movement, we were a pair, and Jimmy Colbert from Southside Chicago and I were together in everything we did. Well, we talked in a black church one weekend, and they burnt the church down before the next Sunday. Just the insanity of, and you know, it's still going on. I mean, they're still trying to take the vote away from black people now.
So you're back now from Mississippi. You're back in Toronto. You're working with the CBC. 1966, the Beatles released an album called Revolver. This has a significant impact on your life. I'm not sure if people can see from the cameras you're wearing a Beatles hat. You can probably see where we're going with this. Tell me about...
I'm wearing a Beatles hat that says Joy on it.
Yeah. Tell me about the impact of that album.
Sure.
And kind of where that led you.
So in those days, so I saw the Beatles live at Maple Leaf Gardens in '64.
My mom was there. I do know that. Sorry, we'll keep going.
So I may have to meet your mom for a couple
I think we might
times.
have to. Yeah,
we might have
set
to.
that up.
And we danced to their music at our parties type thing. Well, when their albums came out, if you didn't get down to A&A Records or Sam the Record Man or some record place, it would sell out within a day, and you'd have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks to get it. So I'm down at I'm in the lineup to get in, and they hadn't sold out, so I bought Revolver. I went back to my rented house in the Eglinton and Bathurst area, and my girlfriend Tricia and I, we loved each other dearly. We smoked a joint in the days when marijuana was so gentle. I don't smoke now; it's too strong. It's just. But in the days when it was so gentle, and for me, marijuana and other psychedelics, other psychotropics, was never about partying. It was actually about exploring the inner world, which is a whole other subject. But what happened was, took a little stereo out in the lawn, put on Revolver, lay down, she had her head on my shoulder, we're listening to Revolver, and it comes the last song, Tomorrow Never Knows, and they're singing, and some of the lyrics are, turn off your mind and float downstream, you are not dying, go towards the light, it is shining, it is shining. It comes to the end of the song, and I remember my first 3 thoughts. My first thought was, what are they talking about? My second thought was, well, if it's something real, it's something my parents and teachers haven't told me about. And the third thought was, it feels like they're being sincere. That was my first curiosity about, is there an inner journey? Is there a soul? Is there a spirit? Is there a what we call heaven? But that needs more explanation. So that was my first being hooked by, is there more to life than hard matter?
So, I mean, there's a famous quote that you say, and I'm going to read this one, and there's a story behind it with Tricia, I believe. But the quote says, "Hey, Paul," this is your introspective quote that you woke up one day and said to yourself, "Hey, Paul, if you really want a closer look at yourself, you might want to get away from the environment that you grew up in."
Yeah. And interesting, I didn't say it to myself. This is so interesting, but it's good you said it that way because we can discern. I'm working now for in Montreal for the Film Board of Canada. And I'm an assistant director, production manager, researcher type of person. And I wake up one morning in my literally little rented room across from the railroad tracks, and I have a shocking thought. And the shocking thought was, I realized there were parts of myself I didn't like, and I was shocked because I thought everything was going well. I'd been the co-host of my own, or our own national public affairs youth television show. I'd been a civil rights worker. I was proud of that. Not proud of it as an ego, proud of it as I felt good about Paul. Good for you, Paul. You went and helped out. So I felt good about myself. I drove a sports car. I dated. Everything was great. I was 23 years old. So the thought that there were parts of myself I didn't like, the realization knocked me back. And I remember exactly, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and I said out loud without thinking, now this is incredibly important, this is a wonderful computer. It's a shitty guidance system. The heart is a wonderful guidance system. It's a shitty computer. I worked with a man in consciousness in the late 80s who was a gifted sage. And he once said, if I had to sum up all my books and all my lectures and all my own knowledge into one sentence, it's all about integrating the head and the heart. Life is about integrating the head and the heart. And this is Earth School. What are we doing here? How come we're all together? Do you know astronomers say there's hundreds of millions of suns in the galaxy?
Right.
Why don't you have your own planet? Because it's more fun for you to be sitting here talking with me and Kyle's over there. It's more fun.
Yeah.
So I say out loud, I have this bad feeling, and I say out loud, what do I do about this? Those were my words, and it just came out. It wasn't the head talking. It was literally the heart. It just came out. And then I hear this inner voice, and it's not my voice. It doesn't sound like me. It's not my voice. It's all calming and all loving. Imagine that feeling, all calming, all loving. And it says, hey, Paul, I think to make sure I was listening, right?
Yeah.
It says, hey, Paul, if you really want to look at yourself more carefully, you might want to get away from the environment you grew up in.
Right.
And I said out loud with this odd conversation, there was no thought, it was in the flow. I said out loud, where do I go? And then in her voice said, India. And that was the end of the conversation.
Unbelievable.
So I had no connection to India. Mysticism, meditation. Do you know meditation and yoga weren't even words in the language? They were there, but hardly anyone ever used them. You know, today, meditation, mindfulness, thank God, it's in now the zeitgeist. So there was a director going to make a film in India. I didn't have enough money to get there. You know, everything I made went to pay gas for my sports car and food and dating. Sure. I didn't have money. So I go up to this director in the lunchroom and I say, I understand you're shooting a film in India. I'd like to work on it. He said, well, I'm not taking anyone from here. I'm hiring a local cameraman, local soundman in Bombay, and I'm taking a cameraman from London. And then there's silence. And Rob, I learned in that moment the value of silence. If you have nothing to say...
Value of the pause.
Of a pause.
Yep.
If you have nothing to say, don't fill it. But it just happened naturally. He said, no, I'm saying I got to get to India. Will you take me? And he says, no. And in that silence, he says, have you ever done sound? And lying through my teeth, not a moment of hesitation, I say, absolutely. He says, okay, well, if you get yourself to Bombay, I'll pay you what I was going to pay the Indian sound man. I say, how much is that? He says, $500. I shake hands and say, done. And I go to the phone and I phone the airlines. How much is a return ticket to India? $550. I've got my ticket. Tricia and I say goodbye to each other. We're both in tears. I'm crying, she's crying. We don't want to part. I get to India. We shoot the film over 6 weeks. I get to Delhi, get my first mail, and I open her first letter. I'm so excited. It's one of those blue aerograms they used to have, you know, the things.
No, I don't know, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. You've not seen those aerograms?
No.
Basically, it's a sheet. It's a thin type of paper.
Okay.
It folds and seals, and the stamp is printed on it. You just address it. Called an aerogram.
Aerogram. Okay.
Yeah, we used that motif on the front of the Blu-ray. We've just come out with a Blu-ray with the film Meeting the Beatles in India. So I get my first letter from Tricia, and I open it excitingly, and the first line is, Dear Paul, I've moved in with Henry. And have you had a heartbreak in your life?
Certainly.
More than one?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Have you, Kyle?
Nope, never. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was devastated. It actually felt like a knife in the heart. I could hear a screaming in my head. I've never experienced this before or since. I could hear an audible screaming, and I knew it was me, and I thought if I let it out, I'll drown in it. So I'm just trying to keep myself alive. What, of course, I know now is when you need to cry, cry. When you need to scream, scream into a pillow. Don't hold it. Somebody notices I'm clearly not doing well and says, what's happening? I say, heartbreak. He says, why don't you try meditation for the heartbreak? I knew him for 3 days in my life. His name's Al Bragg. He's American. I've been trying to find him lately. There's too many Al Braggs. I thanked him, but now I could thank him from a different place.
Sure.
So we went to hear the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I didn't know who that was, at New Delhi University that night. And he talked for an hour and a half, this sort of funny little long-haired Indian yogi with, saffron. No, it wasn't saffron, I don't think. But he said one thing, and it clearly was the reason I was there. He said, meditation takes you beneath and below your daily worries and concerns to a place of inner rejuvenation from which you come back renewed and refreshed. I thought, that's what I need. So in the magic of following one's heart, and I do, when I'm asked, I do a lot of work with young people, even police forces, around moving beyond prejudice, because it's so easy to move beyond prejudice if you actually know how it works in the mechanics of one's own psyche. It's very easy, and it's very rewarding to move beyond prejudice. The thing about prejudice is it restricts us. Yeah, it hurts other people, but it also damages oneself, really. So being independently minded and being in agony, I didn't go up to anyone and say, I'd like to learn meditation. They would have said, come to the office in downtown New Delhi. I just took a train to Rishikesh because I had heard that the Maharishi has an ashram there, which is a retreat center. So I take the train to Rishikesh. I don't know where the ashram is. I ask a taxi driver. He says most of the ashrams are on the other side of the river. And I take a boat across, pay a boatman. I say, do you know where the Maharishi's ashram is? He said, Maharishi ashram that way, and he points down the river. So I'm going down the river, rocks, boulders, edge of the river. The Ganges is wide and beautiful, and it was February. It's like an emerald green. It's like literally an emerald green. I take people there on tours. And I find the ashram, and I say, I've come to learn meditation. And the young man who talks to me, I'm 23. No, I've just turned 24, and he was, I think, 33. He was the guy in charge of the ashram. I said, I've come to learn meditation. He says, I'm sorry, the ashram's closed because the Beatles and their wives are here, and we're doing a course for TM teachers. And I say, you have to teach me. And I tell him why. I'm sure I was in tears. I'm not remembering. I remember saying, you have to teach me. I don't remember the next words, probably because I was in tears.
Sure.
And one thing led to another, and he asked the Maharishi, and the Maharishi said, not at the present time. He comes back to the gate, and he says, I'm sorry, the Maharishi says, not at the present time. I quite love language. Language is a guide for us if we listen. I don't know what I would have said if he didn't say that, but because he said that, I said, well, can I wait? And he was a little taken aback, and there was 2 tents there, and one of them was not being used across the path, and I had a sleeping bag, and he said, well, you're welcome to sleep in the tent. And I waited for 8 days because I couldn't get in. And the Beatles being there was not good news because there was something way more pressing, right? I was hoping meditation would fix the broken heart. So after 8 days, and he was my angel, he said, you're welcome to sleep in the tent, and we'll send you our simple vegetarian meals. This guy was an angel. So I waited, and after 8 days, okay, come on in, went to a small meditation room, just a futon on the floor, and some flowers and whatever, and he gave me a mantra, which is the transcendental meditation methodology. You have a mantra, which is a Sanskrit word or words You say it gently in your mind and you follow it, and it takes you inside. And it takes you inside to a place where you transcend normal waking consciousness. So he says to me, try it. I try it. He says, what are you experiencing? I said, well, my knees are hurting. I had never sat cross-legged once in my whole life. Now you're sitting cross-legged. There's a lot of muscles that are complaining.
Ligaments screaming.
Ligaments screaming. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm being distracted because the dog outside is barking. He said, that's okay. If you're distracted, just don't wrestle with it. Just choose to go back to your mantra. You're now welcome to spend your days in the ashram and take your meals with us, were his words, but there's no extra beds, so you'll have to sleep in the tent. I said, great. I did a 30-minute meditation. I transcended twice. What that meant was I'm sitting here and I'm saying the mantra and I'm listening, and all of a sudden I'm back. I don't know where I had gone, but I didn't fall asleep. But all of a sudden I'm conscious of being in the room again. I go back to my mantra. That happens twice, and 30 minutes later, I finish, I open my eyes. It's an absolute miracle, Rob. A miracle. Nothing short of a miracle. The knife in the heart is gone. Gone. The screaming in the head, there's no screaming in the head. I'm in a state of bliss. I'm stoned. You could have drunk, a couple of whatever you drink to get a little bit high. I'm
just after 30 minutes.
After 30 minutes. I walk out of the room, and I'm in a state of bliss. Bliss is a pretty rare state, right? It's like there's no worries in the world. You're one with the world. You're kind of one with divine presence, whatever that is. So I'm walking through the ashram, and I'm not thinking Beatles, not even in my mind. I'm just so relieved not to be in agony. And I noticed John Lennon. He's about 150 feet away sitting at a table, and I can see that McCartney's sitting opposite him. There's other people at a table. I can't see them just because of the leaves and foliage. But in this altered state, I don't think Beatles, honest to God.
Just four guys sitting at a table?
I find myself curving, and it's honestly it's strange. I honestly I'm curving towards them. Now I'm halfway to them, and I notice, my heart's beating faster. Literally a noticing, not and a not caught. So I get to the end of the table, a long table underneath some shade for the sun, and there's John and Paul and George and Ringo, and Jane Asher's Paul's girlfriend, and Cynthia is John's wife, and Patty is George's wife, Maureen's Ringo's wife, Mia Farrow, the American actress, Mike Love, the lead singer of the Beach Boys, Donovan, the Scottish folk singer, and Mal Evans, their roadie.
What a
There's
table.
12 of them. Amazing.
Yeah.
But being in a state of bliss, I'm in absolute calm. I'm in absolute calm. So they're talking. I don't want to interrupt. So I'm just quiet. After a moment, they realize someone's standing there. So they stop talking and they turn towards me. And John looks up at me, and he's closer than you are to me now. He was right here. I'm standing, he's sitting. Paul's sitting right here. John looks up at me, and with complete calm, I just say, may I join you? And he says, sure, mate. Pull up a chair. Paul says, come and sit here, and he pulls a chair over to the end of the table. And 3 magic things happen. Now, magic is a word I started using more and more about 15 years ago, and I knew what I meant, but I wondered eventually, what does the dictionary say? So I go to the Oxford Etymological Dictionary with all the...
This is the really fine print.
The one with...
You can barely see it, right?
Yes, it comes with a magnifying glass in the box.
The original.
Yeah, there's so many words, right?
Right.
And it's huge, and it weighs, 10, 20 pounds. So I look up magic, and there's 25 meanings. And as I start to read down, I realize, number 1 is the most common usage. Number 25 is the most obscure usage. And down around 23 or 24, I forget, but it was 23 or 24, I find exactly what I was looking for. And it says, quote, magic, that which is real, but we as yet do not understand. That which is real, but as yet we do not understand. So 3 magical things happen. I sit down, Paul pulls a chair, I sit down. As soon as my bum hits the seat, I hear a scream in my head. Again,
back to reality here.
Eek, it's the Beatles.
Right.
Now, I've never said that in my life. When I saw them in '64, I didn't scream. I was just trying to hear them over all the screams.
The women certainly did.
Yes, yes. Many people were screaming, and it was the most electric concert I've been to. I was at the original Woodstock. I've seen Janis Joplin live and things like that, but that was the most electric event I've ever been at. The flashbulbs, all 18,000 people, flashbulbs screaming. The Beatles, I'm trying to hear them. So the fan, I guess, screams, "Eek, it's the Beatles." And I'm just a little taken aback. Like, it's almost like, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
But without thinking, I hear my soul talk to me for the second time in my life. All calming, all loving. And it says, "Hey, Paul, they're just ordinary people like you. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night."
That's what
my soul said. So the beauty of that was I then spent a week sitting with them, and I literally never thought the word Beatles except once.
Amazing.
I'll tell you the once. Because they're just disappeared.
People. They're ordinary people.
Yeah, and we say that, but you can actually have that sense, you know. So then the third magic thing. So the fan pops up. Eek, it's the Beatles. The soul says, "Just ordinary people like you. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night. So I don't think of them as being Beatles or famous anymore." And the third thing is that then John turns to me and he says, in his wonderful, brilliant man, kind man, sweetheart, lovely man, he says, "So you're American then?" And it's not a compliment. "We're the Brits, you're the Yankees, we colonized you, you were the colonies." He says, "So you're American then?" And I say, "No, Canadian." And he turns to the rest of the group and he says, "Ah, he's from one of the colonies." Now we're all laughing. And he turns back to me and he says, "So you're still worshiping Her Highness then?" You know, he's teasing. He's needling.
Yeah.
And I say, "No, not personally." And then Ringo and Paul start teasing me about having the Queen on our money. And we're all in the flow of laughter and play.
A couple buddies just chatting, right?
Exactly. You're just kicking around. So I say, "Well, we may have the Queen on our money, but hey, she lives with you guys." So we're all laughing.
Yeah.
At which point John turns back to the rest of the group and he says, "Ah, you see, they still have a sense of humor in the colonies. They just took me into their group." Because why? Because the fan went away and now we're just playing.
Sure.
You know, this whole thing of children and play, and you played hockey, I play hockey. It's meant to be play.
Yeah.
So that was my first meeting with him.
So you've had this incredible time being ordinary people with the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Like what did you take away from that experience, and how did that move you forward on your journey?
The biggest thing I took away was the meditation. It was life-changing. It was like I came back and I did an article for Maclean's. I needed the money to rent a flat, but I wanted to say, "Hey, people, there's this incredible thing, meditation." The other thing I took away was two magic moments, one with John and one with George. So with John, we're all sitting at the table out by the cliff. People get up and leave, and now I'm sitting with him alone. I'm finishing a chai. He's writing a song in his book. I can see he's writing music notes and words. And he puts his pen down and he looks up at me. And he says in a very kind way, he said, "So what are you doing here?" Because no one's allowed in. The press, by the way, came, 20, 30 people every day when I was sitting outside from all over the world. Life magazine, Japanese this, BBC, CBC.
Paparazzi,
They've all come to interview the Beatles. Sorry, the ashram's closed, and Maharishi would come out and give a news conference once a day to answer questions. So he says, "What are you doing here?" And I just said, you know, heartbreak, meditation, the magic of meditation. And he looks off in the distance in this very dear way, and he turns back to me and he says, "Ah, yes, love can be very hard on us sometimes, can't it?" And I say, "Yeah." And he turns and looks away again, and he comes back and turns back, and he says in a very kind way, he says, "Well, you know, Paul, the really great thing about love is you always get another chance." Now, he could not have been more kind. He couldn't have said anything more soothing. I learned later he was talking about himself too. Later I learned he had met Yoko. He was apparently receiving letters from her secretly.
At that time when you were there.
Yeah. So that, and then George, We're sitting at the same table. Everyone's there. Everyone gets up to leave. Just one of these moments. He's sitting there, and I'm sitting there. We're both finishing a cup of chai. And I thought Beatles only once in the week. And I said to him, I love the way you brought the sitar into Norwegian wood and into Beatles music. And he just lit up. And he spent about 10 minutes telling me about how he'd found the sitar on the set of Help, how he plunked at it, how Ravi Shankar gave a performance in London, how he went to see him, and then he approached Ravi Shankar, and then he spent 6 months in Bombay off and on studying seriously and becoming a very good sitar player. And then he said, I was just going to go practice. Do you want to come? I didn't even think of getting my camera, right? I took my camera out only twice, and I had loads of film. Didn't think of it.
Yeah.
It's like I never thought of asking for an autograph or saying, let's have a picture together.
No.
And they would have given me autographs. We would have had pictures together, because once I was in the group, it was take all the pictures you want. I only took 54 pictures of anyone famous, 72 frames altogether with some scenics, because I didn't think of it. I'm just in the flow. So he says, would you like to come? So we go to a small meditation room. There's his sitar. And he starts playing, and my knees are like you and I. It's a small room. We're this far apart.
Yeah.
And I just closed my eyes. And sitar music has a magic to it.
Yep.
I don't like sitar music that's very frantic, but the sitar music that is not frantic is just otherworldly.
They're like lines with the human vibration almost, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I closed my eyes, and I don't know, Rob, if he played for 10 minutes or 40 minutes. Time shifted.
Yeah.
And then I hear it fading out, and there's no more music. So I slowly open my eyes, and I'm in a state of bliss again. I'm stoned. Who knew?
Yeah.
Listening to sitar. I could see the energy in the room between us, which is a rare experience. I've experienced that once or twice in my life. And then we had this conversation. I wish I'd written it all down afterwards. I only remember two things. He said, I get higher meditating than I ever did on drugs. And I knew what he meant, because I had done that. Meditated, came out in bliss. And then he said this to me. He said, and George was phenomenally a man of humility. And it's interesting, humility, I've come to learn. Humility is not, oh, shucks, no. You say, hey, Rob, you do a great show. And you say, no, that's not humility. That's kind of just not receiving. Humility, I've come to understand, is your size in the universe. You just realize we're beautiful species, but we're only this much of the universe. So let's have a universal.
Knowing where your space is in that, right?
Yeah, and how to honor each other, how to honor the planet, how to, we're supposed to be here to learn about love, I think, and creativity and joy and play. So he was a man of incredible humility. So he said this with total humility. He said, like we're the Beatles after all, aren't we? We have all the money you could ever dream of. We have all the fame you could ever wish for. But it isn't love. It isn't health. It isn't peace inside, is it? That was life-changing for me. And whenever I do an interview, thank you, and whenever I write something, I always tell that story, because it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool to pass on. People forget. I have a friend who's a billionaire. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to invest in film. My hardest job as a filmmaker is finding money. I think I spend 5% of my time being creative and 95% of my time.
Yeah.
I would like to find a billionaire who has got a social conscience and we can do wonderful films together.
Yeah.
But I know a billionaire. He told me one day about a friend of his who's depressed. I said, why is he depressed? He's only got 500 million. Why is he depressed? All his friends have billions, and he doesn't feel good about himself.
Wow.
So George said to me, it ain't health, it ain't love, it ain't peace inside, is it? And as a 24-year-old, and he was 24, it's like, how did this 24-year-old superstar know this stuff?
Yeah.
He was a very rare man.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've met some of these people and you have found the right people to fund the movies that you think matter. And I want to jump forward in your career to how it came to be the movie Prom Night in Charleston, Mississippi, and your relationship with Morgan Freeman.
Right. One small correction. I found that spending my own money, which I've now kind of run out of. So I paid for the whole of prom night in Mississippi. It cost $1.2 million.
Okay.
The good news was I could afford it at the time. The bad news was it didn't make a profit.
Yeah.
But
It
it's
should've.
changed. But it's changed people's
It
lives.
has.
It's
And I
been very-
watched it this week, and it changed mine.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Yeah.
What happened was, I read in the New York Times, Morgan Freeman had given an interview, and he said that as a black man, he felt safer in Mississippi than anywhere else in America. And I thought, what's that about?
Yeah. You've been down there before.
I've been down,
You
sure.
know that doesn't necessarily
No, and
ring
it's
true.
not true today
It's not true
either.
today, yeah.
And then I read in the New York Times another day that more blacks were moving south than north for the first time in American history. And I thought, what's that about? So friends of mine had written and produced Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, in which Kevin Costner, who was the #1 star in Hollywood then,
Yep.
and Morgan Freeman was the co-star. So I phoned my friend Penn Densham, and he says, well, I'm not as good a friend as John is. So I phoned my friend John Watson. Those were the two writer-producers. And I say to him, and he didn't know I'd been doing civil rights work. I didn't talk about it. But I said I was down there in the 60s, and I read this about Morgan. I'd like to have a coffee with him if I can, because I'm going to go back to Mississippi and just see if things had changed.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I can't give you his information. I said, of course not. He said, but if you send me an email, I will forward it. I'll be out of it. You'll hear from him or you won't. I said, great. I wrote an email about midnight. I sent it off. Dear Morgan, I'm a friend of John Watson's. I was there in the 60s. I'm coming. I've read this of what you've said. I'm coming down just to see Mississippi again. Could we have a half-hour coffee? Get up in the morning and there's an email in my inbox. Dear Paul, any friend of John's is a friend of mine.
Wow.
Come on down, signed M. So we communicate by email. I'm now in Mississippi. We arranged that I'll meet him in Clarksdale at a certain motel. So I said, where should I meet you? He said, well, tell me what motel you're at. I'll pick you up. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I go down to meet Morgan. There's this big $80,000, $100,000 brand new BMW. And I open the door, and I don't want to get in with my back to him. So I open the door and I lean down, hi Morgan, and we shake hands. And I get in and I look over at him and I say, and it just came, it wasn't a thought. I said, you look gorgeous. He starts laughing. I start laughing. I say, I don't know where that came from, but it's true. Now we're laughing more. Why did I say it? He's wearing a starched pressed white shirt with monogrammed initials on the sleeves.
Yep.
He's wearing a black baseball cap of some Navy ship he must have filmed on. He's got black jeans that are perfectly pressed and black loafers, and he's a beautiful human being.
Pure gentleman.
Pure gentleman.
Yep.
So one thing leads to another. We have to go, he says, I got to go see something on the jet. It's malfunctioning. He's a jet pilot and he owns a jet with his partner. And so we got to go to the airport for half an hour. So we go to this little airstrip in the middle of cornfields. We're in rural Mississippi.
Yeah.
And then he says, let's go to the club, meaning the, oh gosh, what's the name of his club? Just went out of my brain. Blues club that he and his partner own, Ground Zero.
Okay.
Ground Zero
Ground Zero.
Blues Club. And we have a burger and fries. Some people come over and ask for his autograph because it's a tourist attraction. They know it's owned by Morgan Freeman, and it's a terrific blues club. And he's very nice. He says, I don't sign autographs, but it's very nice to meet you. How are you? And so we're finishing lunch, and I say, let me treat you. He says, no. And I say, well, if we're together at dinner, I'll treat. And he says to me, I think I'll take you home with me.
Okay.
I said, cool.
Yeah.
We spent 9 hours together. We talked about Mississippi and civil rights and life and all the rest of that. We were together at dinner, and that cost me 300 American.
Yeah, he got you there. Yeah.
So what happened was that led me to want to make a film called Return to Mississippi that never got made under that title. And I went back and filmed with him and many other people about how Mississippi had changed or not. But through the making of that film, I heard about the separate proms in Charleston, in Charleston, which is where Morgan lives.
It's where he grew
he
up.
lives outside Charleston.
Did he grow up there too, or just a different area?
Born in Memphis, grew up on
Right.
this. Yeah, his parents had the 10 acres and a what's that thing? 10 acres and a mule.
Right.
And so he lived 5 miles outside of Charleston. And I heard that there were separate proms at the
This
one
is in
high
2007.
school. 2007.
In fact, like up here, we say separate proms. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But that's still. But Charleston was a different place.
And what I don't know is if there still are separate proms, meaning you can't do it legally. So the whites have a party, but blacks are not allowed in. It's a private prom. The black prom, because black parents had a prom for their kids, you could go to the black prom if you were white. It was not a black prom.
Just to celebrate them.
Yeah, just to be celebrating your own graduation.
Yeah.
But you couldn't go to the white prom because, forget it. So that led to the making of the film Prom Night in Mississippi. And that was 4 months of shooting every day. And I paid for it out of my savings because not only could I, but because I didn't know what it would turn into. And if you go to a broadcaster, you have to pitch, here's what it's going to be. Now they have editorial say, they're paying the money, fair enough. So I just made it on my own dime.
Yeah. So you did this film on your own dime. It was a prolific film. It may not have been seen as widely as we might have hoped it to be. But it did get seen and sent to someone who was relatively important. That was, at the time, newly elected President Obama.
Yes. Morgan said to me after the film was finished and I went back to Mississippi to screen it for the community. It's like, just have gratitude. You ask all these people to be in your film. You don't pay them because you're not supposed to pay people in a documentary. Otherwise, it's questionable if they're saying what they're saying for money.
Right.
So I went back and I showed it to the community, and I showed it to Morgan, and he said, we should show this to President Obama. I say, do you know him? Oh, yes, I do.
Of course he does. Yeah. It's Morgan Freeman. Yeah.
It took 2 years, and nothing had happened. I finally said, do you really want to show it to President Obama? Oh, right, okay. So then we end up in a screening at the White House. And there's 150 people in the audience. He's supposed to come. And his people say to me, the best you can do is you're in his official diary. He's in official timetable. If something happens, he won't show up.
Okay.
He declared the end of the Iraq War 3 days earlier, and he didn't show up. But he sent a very beautiful message. And I took 9 of the kids and the father, Glenn. Do you know that Brad Pitt says that Prom Night in Mississippi and the father, Glenn, inspired his character of Lieutenant Aldo Raines in Inglourious Bastards?
Is that right?
Yeah, I got the clip. I can show it.
It's a heck of a character. He does it really well, so
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah. So that was that. But the next day, there was a reception for President Obama and Michelle Obama were holding a reception for community leaders. And in a very beautiful moment, the personal assistant to President Obama said to me, well, it was very interesting. This will take a bit of a minute. He says to me on the phone as we're making arrangements, he said, so let me get this straight. You're not American. No. You're Canadian. Yes. And you didn't go to university in the United States. No. And when you did civil rights work, you weren't living in the States.
This is President Obama talking to you?
No, this is his personal assistant.
Personal assistant, sorry, okay.
He's trying to figure out.
Yeah, why are you so involved with this?
Yeah. And he says, so when you came south to do voter registration, you came from Canada. I said, yes. And you're actually Canadian, not American. Yes. And there's this pause. And he says one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me. He said, well, on behalf of the American government, I'd like to thank you. So the day after the screening of Prom Night, there was this reception for 100 community leaders from across America, university presidents, people who work with poor people in the slums. He said, you need to be a part of it. We want to honor you too, so please come to this reception. So I took my daughter and my friend Kamal, and we went to the reception, and got to shake Obama's hand for 7 nanoseconds because everyone's,
Sure,
you know,
everyone's trying to get at him.
but it was lovely.
Your last, I mean, not your last, but the one you claim to be almost your life story is your film Meet the Beatles.
Meeting the Beatles. in India.
Meeting the Beatles, and this is just to come out in 2020.
Right.
And I watched this one again. This is it kind of accumulates everything of your life into this one film. And is that what the inspiration for it was?
The inspiration for it was not to tell. It's very interesting. I'm glad you asked. I've only put myself in 2 films, and both times I was a little shy about it because that's not my character.
You're behind the camera, it's not in front.
Yeah.
Sure.
But in both those films, The Last White Night and Meeting the Beatles in India, there was a character. It happened to be me, and that character's journey had value to tell the story. That's why I did those 2 films. There was a story to tell, not about me, about the situation.
Yep.
With the Beatles, Meeting the Beatles in India, what I wanted to do was a film that addressed creativity and meditation, and the fact that that was probably their single most creative capsule of time. They wrote 48 songs in less than 7 weeks.
Right.
How did that happen? I'm interested. What's the connection between meditation and creativity? And so that was what the purpose of the film was. How do you tell that story without it being boring? You need a character to follow. I couldn't follow, John was gone and George was gone. I asked Apple, the Beatles company, for 15 years, I asked them to do it with me. Let's do a film about creativity and meditation and their incredible output.
Yeah.
No, finally get lost, kid. So the only character left was me. So I told the story just from how transformative it was. So I got to say things like meditation's a miracle, which I want to say to people, you know?
Yeah. It's an incredible film. I recommend everyone out there to Meeting the Beatles. It's pretty special.
Yeah. Thank you. And part of the reason, I do tours to India and Bhutan. And the reason I do them, because I put my pictures away and I forgot about them for 32 years, literally, out of sight, out of mind. When my daughter was 16, she became a Beatles fan with her 3 best girlfriends. It had nothing to do with me. I wasn't playing Beatles music in the house. And she says to me, didn't you tell me when I was little you met the Beatles in India? And I said, yes. And she said, didn't you tell me you took some pictures of them? And I said, yes. I didn't remember I'd told her. I hadn't even told my first wife, who was from India, nor had I told my best friends I met the Beatles. Why? It was just personal.
Yeah.
It's not about...
Which is unusual for human. They would want to tell this incredible... Yeah. For you, it was just part of your journey.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I lead these trips to India and Bhutan, and they're joyful journeys, and they're life-changing for people, they tell me that, is I'm just sharing my love of India. I mean, India has all the negatives we know about, which, by the way, Canada does too.
Sure.
But India also has a soul that's quite a different kind of thing. And it's a beautiful country, and it's a colorful country, and it's an incredibly creative country. So I lead these tours really just for that reason.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, this is a show about Oakville, the people that live and work and do business here, and you have made your home in Oakville.
Yes.
So I wanted to know, how did you land in Oakville, and what's your experience like as being part of this community?
How I landed here was I knew I wanted to find a house on the water because it's calming.
Yes.
So I actually took 3 weekends, and I drove from Port Hope to Hamilton Bay, up and down every street to see every building or house on the water, and I found a house in Oakville. So I've lived here for 20 years. I completely love it.
Yep.
I don't miss Toronto at all. I go in and play hockey at St. Mike's. I have friends in Toronto.
Yep.
But for me, everything's here, and I wake up every morning and the water is in my backyard, so
special.
It's peaceful.
Yeah. So this brings us to the part of our show that a lot of our fans will recognize. This is the Robcast Rapid Ask, which is a mouthful. I've changed the questions a little bit for you this week, but we'll still stick with the first one. If you kind of had your last meal, you're by yourself, you're not with anyone, you just had a plate and you could have anything on it, what would be on that plate for you?
I'd probably go to the Mandarin.
You get to take full advantage of the all-you-can-eat.
and the variety.
I thought we were going to get into some eclectic Indian New Delhi foods and things. No, just
Kill himself with food before they went.
Yeah,
That's
my
smart.
second choice is I'd go to an Indian restaurant, which is my favorite, at Huron, Ontario, and Eglinton. It used to be called Bombay Bale. It was the one that was attacked at one point.
That's right.
But it's now not called Bombay Bale, I don't think. But they have the best for me.
Okay, I'm taking note out there. If you've sat down and met with a lot of prolific people, if there was someone dead or alive that you could sit down with and have dinner with and pick their brain, who would that person be?
Wow, great question. Nelson Mandela.
Yep.
And I did have 5 minutes alone with him in my life. It just was an accidental thing. I was at a fundraiser. He was sitting by himself in a separate room. I sat beside him and I said, "Do you mind if I talk to you for a minute?" And he said, "Sure." And I said to him, and this just came.
Yeah.
These are, it's again, if you follow your heart, it's the best guidance system. I don't know why I said this, but I said to him, "I'm not sure why I'm saying this to you, but I happen to be named after Paul Robeson. I'm named after Paul Robeson, the great American black singer, athlete, civil rights hero, and all the rest." And he said, "Oh, that is so good. I always wanted to meet him. I never got to meet him."
Wow.
And we just chatted for 5 minutes. I want more. I'd like to
wanted
ask
more
him
of
about
that.
his life.
This might be a tricky one for you. What would be your favorite movie that you have seen?
Well, the one that impacted me emotionally the most is called The Shop on Main Street.
Okay.
And it's a film that takes place in a small town in Czechoslovakia, the turn of the war.
Yeah.
Other films I've loved: The Princess Bride, Searching for Bobby Fischer, Gandhi, Gentleman's Agreement from the 40s.
Yeah. I'm going to leave you on this one. Looking back at your life, what would you say your greatest achievement is in your heart, looking back?
That's a hard one. I think my greatest achievement is just managing to stay open-hearted. Because you have to work at it. The world is a very traumatic place,
Yeah.
So I would say just managing to stay heartful.
Well, I mean, it's an incredible story. It's an incredible message, and we're so honored to have you here. And on behalf of Kyle and I believe the residents of Oakville, we thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really kind of you.
Please stay tuned for another episode of the Robcast.
The Robcast is brought to you by Oakville's own Fisher Private Wealth Management of RBC Dominion Securities and Fraser Associates of RBC Private Banking.